Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. This is my first Zoom webinar, so a little bit of a novice, but thank you for joining me today. What we're going to be talking about is EVP as the core of strategic HR. So before we start, I'd like to introduce myself, Rebecca Horton. In my last role, I was at Australia Post for about 7 years and headed up resourcing and careers, which basically meant talent acquisition, internal mobility and career transition, as well as part of the People Experience Programme in my later years. What I do today is advise business leaders and HR practitioners on how to do business differently, how to adapt to the new world of work, if you like. And that really spans strategy, leadership and talent. So today in the talent space, I'm going to talk to you about EVP and to share with you my perspective on what it is and what it isn't, and how to approach it from a practical viewpoint, no matter where your organisation sits on the maturity curve, and potentially no matter where they sit in terms of budget. So very quick housekeeping before we start. I will be doing a couple of breaks for questions along the way, and I understand Alan's given you instructions to that. If there's anything that I can't get to in time, I will commit to emailing answers after the event. So let's get going. Right. The concept of EVP has been around for a little while, and today one of the things that I still hear, which is a little bit of a surprise, is that people confuse employee value proposition with employer value proposition. So I want you to have a little concept in your mind as I talk through a number of these pieces, is that consider careers like a consumer product. You know, as a consumer product, the value proposition is always customer value prop, not salesperson value prop. So EVP is always an employee value proposition. The way that I see it is that employees and prospective employees are our customer in HR. I do view careers as a product, the product of HR actually. And if we carry that forward as a concept, you know, TA is your sales and marketing team, Rem and Benz is your pricing unit, L&D is your customer success team, OD is your product design, so on and so forth. What I'm really trying to get to here is HR really need to consider themselves as a product manager in the concept of careers. And once you adopt that mentality, the prospect of developing really good EVPs and executing really good EVPs actually becomes a lot simpler and a lot more logical. So for a number of years, EVP has been driven out of talent acquisition. And this has really been because, like the sales and marketing teams, they are looking for a compelling value proposition in order to do their job. I mean, effectively, they need a story to sell. But I don't actually think that EVP lives in TA. I do believe that it is across HR capability. So that would be the strongest message that I want you to take away today. So let's talk through the history very, very briefly. Quite a long time ago, Brett Menchington developed this statement. He's one of the godfathers of EVPs, if you like. And he talks about the associations, experiences, and offerings provided by an organisation in return for skills, capability, and the experiences an employee brings. So if we focus on our side of the equation as employers, associations, experiences, and offerings. Where we used to start was really around the offerings. So in my language, this is the kind of the table stakes of being able to offer a product to market at all. So those might be your Rem and Benz effectively. So if you think about this like a product, like buying a car, every buyer has got a price range in mind. Every buyer has certain features in mind that means that they know what they're shopping for. People in the talent market are fairly similar. They are quite sophisticated. They do know what they're shopping for. So really your offerings are table stakes. They are the hygiene factors that you need in order to be a consideration. The offerings, though, aren't what sells the product. It really narrows down the shortlist. So let's talk a little bit about associations. So we play a larger role here. That's the reputation that's associated with the product, or in our cases, with the organisation. So if you recall, a few years ago, the emission scandal for Volkswagen, the impact of that on their ability to hire and retain people was really, really significant. And that's what I mean by associations. It's really the level of pride people feel in the organisation that they're associated with and what that says about themselves. So the third piece really is experiences. And this, I think, is a little bit newer to the HR space, people experience or human experience. And really, this is very, very much customer focused. So if you think back to customer experiences and product experiences, if anyone, uses Apple or, buys a car, it's kind of your post-sales experience and your onboarding experience that really makes you a loyal customer as opposed to a first-time customer. And this really plays out, I think, in the way that we look at talent and EVP. One of the fastest growing roles in e-commerce, for example, is a customer success manager. And their job is to make sure that the customer gains the full benefit of their purchase as early as possible, and they renew their contract when the time comes. Now, if you play HR language, that really does talk to onboarding, development, and retention. So those are the three critical pillars of a decent EVP. As you can see, it's an awful lot more than marketing. It really is the blueprint of careers that is owned across a number of different areas of HR. That's probably why it's traditionally quite difficult to do, because there's no one area that has effective accountability for it. So it does take the whole of team HR. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the way that it's evolved and the different maturity levels that you might be at, because not everyone has the opportunity to have very, very advanced EVPs, nor even the need in some cases. So the original stage, I think, is the corporate-centric space, where really, if your brand and your brand marketing, so your recruitment marketing, look and smell the same, then that's good enough. Now, that's this kind of space where you're looking at a one EVP scenario. And 4 years ago, Australia Post, that's what I was facing into with my executive. They really believed that the brand did all the heavy lifting, that people understood the red P and what it stood for, and we really didn't need to invest at all. So 4 years ago, Australia Post, I didn't have a single dollar associated with anything outside of job advertising. Basically, there was nothing in terms of brand or EVP understanding. Now, it's an understandable mindset and a mistake for executives to make. Back when we had a talent-rich market and there were, not enough jobs to go around and people trusted in brands, this was a reasonable assumption to make, that the brand would do the heavy lifting, but that's obviously changed. As the talent short market has stepped up, sorry about this, I don't know what's going on with my computer. As the talent shortage has crept up and the brand trust has crept down, many of us have had to move up the maturity curve and start looking at a more product-centric or job family-specific way of doing their EVP. What we're seeing there, it is separation of career offerings like graduate versus executive or something like that. And some organisations where they have the need have even taken it one step further and started to segment and personalise the offering to specific customer groups, which I think is really, really valid in highly critical, hyper-competitive talent spaces, or where you've got really high volumes of a particular type of role. So let me talk to you a little bit about, let me stop there for a moment and see if we can field some questions. Obviously, that's the end of the theory, so we'll get into some more practical stuff next. So I think the first thing that I'll do is share with you a model that I've used quite extensively to try and identify what sort of space my key job families sit in. Obviously, in an organisation like Australia Post, we had quite a lot of different job families, and we really needed a way to split them up and get them organised. So this is quite useful if you're sitting there thinking that you're not quite sure what types of job families you've got and what tactics to deploy. And I'll talk you through how I see it. So the first one is typically if you have a well-known brand, that would sit in the top two quadrants, number 1 and 2. For Australia Post, we were, very, very well known as a brand. Not always well known in terms of the careers that we had. We had 2 separate problems or challenge statements. Number 1 was where we had quite a low understanding or awareness of the careers on offer, but a very high understanding of our brand. So that might be, for example, our digital careers, where we had large numbers of people, 500 or 600 in the digital space, but people weren't really looking at us as a destination. Hold on for a sec. The number 2 space was really where we had quite a high understanding of the career offerings, but that brought with it its own challenges. So, for example, our retail outlets, everybody has been to a post office, everybody's met the people who work behind the counter at a post office, so everybody has an impression and an opinion of what that job's all about. And I'll let you into a secret. Most people would be quite shocked when they had to go around the back and it felt more like a logistics outlet with dirty great vans and big parcels and dusty and dirty, and they're unloading vans and putting parcels on shelves for at least half of their time, not necessarily just serving customers and handling transactions. So our challenge in Space 2 was really to make sure that we kind of corrected expectations and assumptions so that people weren't joining for the wrong reasons. Our challenge in Space 1 was to get people to recognise that we had job offers at all, because they really laughed us out of town when we said, come and be a digital developer at Australia Post for quite a long time. The quadrants 3 and 4 are really different and equally difficult. So these are where your brand recognition is quite low. Typically, if you're a business-to-business brand, you might find yourself in these spaces. So these are brands not well known by the general public. And quadrant number 3, has the double whammy where the brand isn't well known and the careers are not well known. Now, in those sorts of spaces, headhunting or outreach is a really, really sensible approach, because you're going to have a long, long road to develop general awareness of your brand and awareness of the overall career offerings if people don't even know who you are. So that's a pretty hard road, and outreach is one of the fastest ways to manage your talent intakes despite those challenges. The quadrant 4 is really, really rare, and I was sort of sat there thinking, gosh, I've hardly ever met anyone who has quadrant 4. So, organisations who are really only known via their jobs, and in a comedic way, you could think about organisations like MI5 or MI6 with the James Bond factor. But actually, the Australian Border Force programme, I don't know if anyone's watched it, has had such an amazing impact on their recruiting efforts, because suddenly people discover there's a company that does this. They didn't really know, and unless you travelled internationally, you'd have no clue. And they have these jobs. And, obviously they're amazingly cool and interesting because of the way that they've edited this particular program. But that's the sort of challenge that organisations in quadrant 4 face into, and they really have to look at very novel ways of handling their job intakes and the way that they express their career offerings. So what I want to do is show you a little video, hopefully this all works, which is really for the where I would probably talk about quadrant 2. So a pretty well-known organisation where jobs are quite well understood, but perhaps need a little bit more unpacking. So a bit of fun with that one. And really that is a very product-focused approach to EVP. What they're talking about in that ad is the offering, the opportunity, the way that the graduate program works and what you'll experience. There's nothing, though, in that particular approach that talks to the individual and what they want, who they're talking to. And this really brings us on to the third stage of that maturity model, which is a lot more involved, a lot more detailed. If you think about it from a consumer product perspective, it's something that financial services do really well. I mean, they pretty much have an insurance product for everybody at every stage of their life cycle, at every age, in every demo. These are the spaces where you've got, renter insurance, single parent cover, you've got retiree cover, you've got plans for just about every possible combination of the things that you see in this slide. This, of course, is not for everybody. This is a very expensive and detailed way of going about your EVP. So typically where I see this happening is where you've got a major high priority job family, where you really need to start segmenting it down into perhaps diversity or specific life stage opportunities. So rather than me talk to you about this, let me show you another video a little bit longer this time, that really expresses it incredibly well. I think this is one of the cleverest EVP videos that I've seen. And afterwards, I'll break down why I think it's so smart. Okay, so I hear that the sound isn't playing, which is a little bit of a shame. So I will send this link out. The EVP video that I was showing you is an EY whole of careers solution, which is just terrific. Really what it does is it profiles a mature age female who's very clearly comes from abroad, indiscriminate abroad. And they're bringing her into their internship. Obviously, the consultant role for EY is their primary job family. So they can afford to invest very significant focus on how they work the EVP here. And what you'll see as you go through it, and I will send it out, is journey right across her life stages. As she starts as a new starter, she feels terribly gauche and unsophisticated. She knocks over a coffee. It's all quite funny because we've all been there, and how awkward we feel when we're a new starter. We see her go through quite significant hard work. So this is a really balanced view of how hard the work is, how late the hours are. We see her going home late to her husband, and how incredibly tough it is to start with. But then we start to see her kind of take off. We see her confidence rising, her maturity levels improving. We see her taking on bigger assignments. And towards the end of the video, we actually see her stepping up as a partner and bringing in her first intern and mentoring that intern. To be honest, I challenge any of you to watch it and not get a little bit tearful. It really talks to the human, and it's very, very targeted. We really know that this is a campaign that's designed to focus on females who want to go through their career to reach partnership. But what's incredibly clever about it is it has a supporting actor. It has this guy that she meets on her first day. She spills the coffee on him, actually. And throughout their career, he takes a different path. He leaves EY and he goes off to become an entrepreneur in the digital space. But he stays connected through the alumni program, and they meet up at a very, very swanky event, again, somewhere indiscriminately foreign. And he's doing incredibly well in his chosen career, and she's doing incredibly well in her chosen career. So a really brilliant way of showing two career types, two persona types, but really elevating their focus on female in partnership roles. It provides you information about the opportunity to travel, but a really balanced view on both the hard work and the rewards. So I'll send that video out. I think it's an absolutely top tier example of EVP marketing done very, very well. So let's talk to you a little bit about what we did at Australia Post. We'll get into some detail around two case studies in particular. One is how we tackled our digital careers. And as I've mentioned to you before, these were the careers where people literally laughed at the talent acquisition team when they said, come and have a job as a developer at Post. And also how we dealt with one of our biggest job families and all the misunderstandings and the misassumptions that went with driving trucks for Australia Post, and what we did to really increase our female participation in that space. So the philosophy that we adopted at Australia Post was to be balanced and authentic. So we needed to reflect our culture. We needed to not set expectations that were unrealistic. We recognised if there was a break between the sales and marketing message of talent acquisition versus the reality that was the rest of HR's oversight, we would create a retention issue in our new starters on our own. So we had to make sure that we were being really consultative and not salesy. And we had to make sure that talent were making the right career choice. So really the purpose of EVP was not necessarily to attract more people. It was really to make sure that we were retaining the right people, attracting the right people and retaining the right people, and engaging all our people in the process of what an EVP meant and how we went to market with it. And when I say go to market, because Australia Post was so big, what I mean is internal and external. I'm not just talking about external hiring. So what did we do? We very much adopted this concept of consumer marketing and consumer product. And we looked at the life cycle right the way through the 6 key stages. Stage 1 being awareness, so the awareness of the brand, which we didn't have a problem with, and the awareness of the career offerings, which sometimes we did have a bit of a challenge with. We took that through then into social validation. Now, this is a classic stage that we were really missing, which is that most people, when they're making a high value purchase, like a car or a house or a career, will actually do quite a lot of research before they sign any paperwork, before they move into the purchase stage. So we needed to be more present in that social validation space and make it easier for them to do their research and to check us out before they decided to purchase a career. So then there's the purchase stage, which is really the point of transaction. And then we had to look hard at our onboarding, all the way through tenure and into advocacy. So taking, the practical view, which was that not everyone would stay, but we'd like them to say good things. Now, obviously, at a size of Australia Post, that was going to be massively challenging. But what it did do for us when we started looking at it at a very top end level was tell us quite clearly that in almost all cases, we had the wrong TA structure and we had the wrong investment, or we had the right level of investment, probably being put into the wrong places. So for talent acquisition in particular, it meant a complete overhaul. So let me explain this to you. The turquoise line was where we were, and where we were was very underrepresented in our awareness and social validation space. We really concertinaed pretty much all our effort into what I would consider recruiting, so this point of purchase, which is really job ad to verbal offer. And then we fairly much dropped them, into a black hole when it came to onboarding, the joining experience, how they developed their careers, and advocated for us in the future. So our business case was to correct that structure and investment by pushing resources out of the transactional space and into both the awareness and social validation space and into the onboarding and advocacy space, which is exactly what we then went to do. So this is how it looks. As I mentioned, with an organisation like Australia Post, it was going to be impossible to have a single EVP. And we could have had millions of job families, tens of job families. What we did was we selected our 6 most either strategically critical, largest, most expensive, so our real high priority roles. And we took the product-centric approach to start with. What we did was top and tail it. So up at the top, what you can see is our consumer brand campaign. So that's what sat under the red P for a number of years in terms of the sentiment of how we went to market for our consumers. And at the bottom, we underpinned it with the values so that we made sure we were representing culture as we went. We looked at it across 6 key job families and started to develop the key messaging right across that spectrum. And as you can see, we really had a messaging that went from secure and reliable at the more traditional ends of the family, so where our drivers, blue collar, retail operated, all the way through to more surprising and cutting edge, which is what you'd expect to see with IT and digital. And we had to develop different strategies for pretty much every single one of those job families, and I'll just share 2 of them with you. Right, so the first of these is our digital developers, which I talked to you about. So forgive me if you can't see that incredibly clearly. But effectively what we did was both our focus groups, our external research in terms of how we compared to others on brand, but also how we compared to others on what mattered to this kind of talent. We really developed our key messages with a very large number of our existing staff. So they had a lot of investment in what we were saying. And could really authentically support what we were saying. One of the things that we identified with this particular segment, so we did do a little bit of segmentation, was that this persona didn't really respond well to kind of bulk advertising. They had quite a low trust in institutions, quite introverted people, and typically responded to people like them, ideally in a one-on-one or a one-on-few interaction. So they definitely weren't seeing Post as a destination employer. And we really needed to engage all of our digital family in, acquiring more people and appealing to more people like them. So as you can see, the recommendations for this EVP were really to focus strongly on the external. We didn't do a lot of recruiting internally for digital developers because pretty much all of the talent we had was in one place. We created a bespoke referral program. We didn't have referrals for every single job family, but very explicitly for this one we did. And we engaged the whole of business. So we actually ran some EVP sort of expos where we made sure that everybody understood the message, how we developed the message, understood the referral program offering for them, and understood their role in being involved in meetups and expos and becoming brand ambassadors or talent magnets themselves. And they really got behind it. So that totally changed the dial for how we evolved our digital development family, and we got up to about 500 or 600 people with very, very little traditional advertising and traditional recruiting tactics. And we did find, by doing a lot more of this, that we were starting to discover a few more people inside the broader Australia Post internal talent pool, but as you'd imagine, not a huge amount. Totally differently for our next case study, which is the Women in Transport EVP. Our Women in Transport campaign was really driven by the fact that we had 99% men driving trucks, and we really didn't have that balance of diversity that we were looking for. So we took quite a holistic approach here. And what I want to do is talk to you through this slide from right to left, because the very first place we knew we had to focus was on experience. This wasn't as simple as an awareness campaign, where the digital space, it actually was. We pretty much got most of the experiences right for them. It was more about leveraging them to tell other people like them that it was a great place to work. With Women in Transport, it was almost the reverse. So let me start on the right-hand side. The first thing we had to do was really focus on family-friendly shifts. Our shift patterns were really not supporting anyone who was a primary carer, male or female. So that was an area that we fixed quite quickly. And we spent quite a long time on making sure that we were targeting and developing women into leadership roles. We didn't want to bring in a whole load of women to drive trucks, where the first signal they saw was that there were no women as leadership in leadership roles. So that was a slower, longer burn before we could turn on any marketing capability whatsoever. Another couple of quick wins, which might surprise you, some of you. One was uniforms. All of our high-vis jackets were in men's sizes and were really quite tight across the bust. So it didn't work for ladies at all. So we really had to go back to basics and order women's uniforms. And another piece was our amenities. In most of our facilities, because they were built in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't even a dedicated ladies' toilet, and if there was, it was typically for visitors. So they had to march right across the facility to go to the loo, and that wasn't a great experience. So we really had to fix those things up before we could then work through a number of other pieces. We definitely recognised that women were less confident to drive trucks, and because there weren't very many women, we knew we needed to develop a network of support around them to encourage their participation and their retention in the workplace and to make them feel safe and included. So the buddy system and the driver training course was really ramped up to make sure that we were supporting their transition into the workplace and making it easier to stay in the workplace. And then towards the left-hand side, you're starting to look a lot more at classic onboarding improvements and recruitment campaigns and awareness campaigns. One of the things that we used was text.io, which, language that we were using in our job ads to make it more female friendly. And honestly, I was very, very surprised at the impact. It was quite material. The other thing we did was look at where we were advertising and started to open up and experiment with channels on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And that was very, very successful as well and really changed our price profile. And we did a lot of video work, so some really targeted advertising to females. So the results of that really did speak for themselves. We doubled our application rate, we tripled our placement rate, and we actually slightly improved our female retention rates as well. So a very, very successful approach. The campaign itself was only 8 weeks long and got 1.5 million hits. So incredibly worthwhile and reasonably cost effective. Now, when I say reasonably, we were targeting 300 hires, which we exceeded. So in terms of cost per hire, it was worthwhile, but it was a reasonably big figure to start with. So I'm going to see if our sound is working this time and play you the video that we developed for Women in Transport, the one that netted 1.5 million hits. And then I'll see what we can do about answering some of your questions.
One of the things that surprised me is when I come to a new customer and they'll say something like, "Oh, we've got a woman postie today." And I think, "Oh, I didn't realise there wasn't that many women posties or women in this role," and because it's a great role to play. It's lots of moving and lifting, but it's not something beyond my capabilities and never has been. I've never felt unable to fulfil the role, but I feel like at the end of the day I come home and I don't need to go to a gym.
The concern that you are a woman in this industry and you don't have that hassle, and actually the boys have actually said to me they like getting into a truck after I've been in the truck because it smells good. So that's, I think, a positive. People look after people. I feel we become a bit of a family because we've been together for quite a while, so I think that's good in the workplace. If somebody needs help, I'll ask them, and helping hand's good. More hands the better. And also it's safer as well too, of course.
I had my manager actually help me and take me under his wing. So I became a supervisor. It is a big part of the culture. It's so good because we have so many different cultures, personalities here, that you can have a joke with them and have fun while you're working.
We're really good at communicating with each other and looking out for each other. Favourite part is just coming in and talking to everyone that you work with and developing those relationships too, and having a joke, and then getting out onto the road and still enjoying the driving experience as well. I'm Leanna and I'm a run truck driver.
My name's Susan Butler. I'm a transport driver part-time.
My name's Emily Walter and I'm a parcel transport officer.
My name's Mel Littis. I'm a postal transport officer.
My name's Danielle. I know I drive trucks.
Well, so that brings me to the end of talk time. I'm going to hang around for another 10 minutes to see if I can get to some of your questions, but we are actually experiencing a little bit of an issue with some of our functionality, as you probably noticed. So my commitment to you is that if you submit a question today, I will absolutely get back to you either one-on-one or to the entire group. So please nominate whether you want that question shared or directed at you. And if anybody wants to contact me, my email and my mobile is right there. Feel free. Apologies that we didn't manage to do the interactive part of today, but I hope you found that useful, maybe gave you a few ideas and possibly even one or two answers to questions that you might have. And certainly if you go away with nothing else, please consider this. If you treat your careers as a product, and if you think about going to market with them and developing them and refining them as a product, you will find that your careers are way more competitive than anyone else's in your space. And I'd be happy to field any questions that you've got on that in the future. Cheers. Thanks very much.
Hi, thanks very much, Rebecca. That was really fantastic. Appreciate your time. Thanks everybody else also for your attending. That was really great. We will also have a recorded, we'll record this webinar as well and make it available to you all at a later date. And it's the same thing with questions. If anyone has any questions, please email through. to Rebecca, and we can go from there. But I think without further ado, I think that's it for today. So thanks so much. Unless anyone has anything else, that's it. Thank you and all the best. Bye for now.
Bye for now.